Segment 4, the war at home. Airports. I put up a question on ricochet.com just a few hours ago asking for questions for you. And you know what? A lot of people want to know why Americans are still standing in lines at airport. Here's from somebody who's called Frodosphere. So much of what Homeland Security does is widely seen as a joke, especially in airport security. Lately, it's gone from joke to far worse. Please find a respectful way to ask Mr. Chertoff if he ever felt foolish enforcing these silly, hyper-risk-averse or politically correct rules.
Well,
Consider that question respectfully submitted.
So here's my respectful answer. I didn't feel foolish because on the Saturday night before 9/11, I had dinner with someone who was in the American Airlines flight that crashed into the Pentagon. And that sobers up your sense of humor about this. Look, I stand in lines like everybody else, and I do not only here, but I do it overseas. And I might tell you that overseas, you get quite a robust pat-down. I mean, I came back from Europe last week, and I got a very thorough pat-down coming through the airport. The reason we do it is because the number one target for terrorist attacks is still aviation. We saw it not only in 9/11, we saw it in 2006 when there was a major plot that we disrupted. We even saw it with the effort made last year to put bombs on cargo planes, to blow them up in midair. It would be great if we had a magic technology that avoided having to stand in line and just allowed us to detect if people have explosives as they move through the airport. And maybe we will at some point. And there's some other things we can do to try to make it a little bit easier and to kind of manage the risk. But at the end of the day, the reason we do these things is because otherwise planes will start to blow up. And I don't think anybody wants to have a loved one on a plane that's
so
subject of a bombing.
Fundamentally, you defend the system as it is.
I do, because I recognize that the problem is not going away. And I have lived, let me give you, again, a concrete example. We have a watch list. And I used to get criticized.
We meaning Homeland Security, U.S. government.
Yeah.
Right.
And we had maybe several thousand people on the no-fly list and maybe about 20,000 on the selectee list who fly. And there were repeated criticism, not only from the ACLU but from members of Congress. Why do you have so many people on the no-fly list? Why do you have so many people on the selectee list that you have to be searched? And the day after the underwear bomber was caught, the criticism was, why don't you have more people on the no-fly list? Right. Why don't you have more people on the selectee list? So for one who had the responsibility actually to make sure people didn't get killed, you learn that you can't be guided by what people think at any given point in time, because that can turn very quickly if a tragic event occurs.
Right. The border. Two quotations. Charles Krauthammer, quote, the Government Accountability Office reported in February, this is a recent column, we're talking about this past February, that less than half the border, our border with Mexico, is under the operational control of the government. I, Charles Krauthammer, I have little doubt that most Americans would be quite willing to regularize and legalize the current millions of illegal immigrants if they were convinced that the border is secure, close quote. Second quotation, President Obama, speaking in El Paso earlier this month of May, quote, to support reform, Republicans say we need a higher fence. Maybe they'll say we need a moat, or alligators in the moat. They'll never be satisfied. Close quote. Whose side are you on?
Well, first, I think the president was being too cavalier with the very serious concern people have about securing the border. And I think that was a mistake to put it that way. That being
That's
said,
about as rough as you're going to get, I guess.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
All right, okay.
That being said, I also think those who say nothing has been done at the border are also wrong. I mean, I can tell you where we were 5 years ago.
You had something called the Secure Border Initiative. That was yours.
Correct.
How far did you get?
Well, we built 600 miles of fence. We doubled the Border Patrol, so it was 20,000. We deployed mobile radar, sensors, other kinds of technology. And in some sectors of the border, we so dramatically decreased the flow that we went from literally hundreds of thousands a week down to a handful a week. So we did make a lot of progress in those parts of the border that were the most heavily trafficked. Now, what that has done is it has driven people into parts of the border that are much more difficult for them to pass. And so over time, if you keep up what we were doing, you will eventually be able to get operational control over most of the border. Mm-hmm. But recognize that operational control in heavily trafficked areas is different than in areas that are mountainous, for example, where there's just less foot traffic or vehicular traffic. So the short answer here is we have made a lot of progress, and anybody who says we haven't, won't take yes for an answer. But at the same time, we're not done. And what I would like to see us do is complete the job, and then I think we're in a position to say to the American people, we have, within what is reasonable in human existence, we've got a secure border.
So just as a kind of logistical matter,
right.
Here's the way the layman looks at it. We have tens of thousands of miles of interstate highways in this country,
right.
and lots of them have hundreds and hundreds of miles of walls and embankments. Google Maps, you can get a very detailed look at any place on the planet
right.
by going to Google Maps. Why should it be beyond the capacity of the United States government to get total control of the southern border?
Well, so it's not beyond the capacity to get operational control of the border. But remember this.
Right.
Remember a few facts. It's not just a question of putting a wall or a fence up, although we've done a lot of that. You have to patrol it because
right.
you have to apprehend people who are coming over. They dig tunnels underneath it, so you have to have the technology to look for that. There is an amount of money that we could spend that would get us, within a reasonable period of time, operational control over the rest of the border. Remember, just speaking for the years that I was there,
right.
in the 2 years I was there, we went from 11 miles of fence to 600 miles of fence.
In 2 years?
In 2 years. From 10,000 or less Border Patrol to 20,000 Border Patrol. But I want to tell you that we had to fight litigation, issues about condemning property, protests from people on the border who didn't like what we were
right.
doing on the border. All of which, and of course, the expense of doing it, all of which took a fair bit of time. That being said, we accomplished it. And we could complete the job if we are prepared to spend the money, and it is a lot of money. And so there's a budget
lot of money
impact.
means what?
Billions and billions of dollars. Because, remember,
right.
it's not just...
War in Iraq cost us, at the lowest budget estimate I've seen for the cost of the war in Iraq is $700 billion. You're talking about $100 billion,
if you put $100 billion,
right?
If you put $100 billion into the border...
To secure one of America's own borders.
I agree with you. You'll be able to secure it.
And do you subscribe to the basic argument that Charles Krauthammer asserts here, which is, before we can do anything with the immigration problem, we have to establish the confidence of the American people that the federal government is in charge of the border?
I do.
That you do subscribe to?
I do subscribe to that.